intentionally calming and boring bedtime story, perfect for falling asleep. Enjoy. For the best experience, I recommend lowering the volume until my voice is just a whisper, barely audible. This will make the journey even more relaxing and soothing. The images on screen are only gentle guides, but the true magic happens when you close your eyes and let your imagination bring the story to life. Support the channel by liking and subscribing. A long time ago, in the forgotten corners of Tirranor, the forest grew silent as Torian moved through it. The sylvan elf's footsteps made no sound on the damp earth, his lithe form blending with the shadows cast by ancient trees. 300 years of life had taught him the language of the Forestan today. It spoke of fear. Something was wrong in the northern reaches of Shadowgrove. The animals had grown scarce, the birds no longer sang, and an unnatural mist clung to the hollows even under the midday sun. For weeks, reports had reached the woodland realm of strange disturbances, trees withering without cause, water turning bitter in clear streams, and whispers of shadow figures glimpsed between the trunks at twilight. King Elrond had dispatched him to investigate, though many counselled against sending scouts so close to the misty mountains. The memory of darker days still lingered among the elder elves. Torian paused, crouching to examine a patch of moss. It had blackened and shriveled, as if touched by frosty. The air was mild for early autumn. More troubling were the tracks cutting through it. Not animal, not elf, not orc. Something else had passed this way, leaving impressions like a man might make, but with an uneven gait that suggested injury or deformity. He followed the trail westward, bow ready, senses alert to the smallest change in his surroundings. The trees thinned as he approached the foothills, giving way to rocky slopes dotted with stunted pines. The tracks led toward a narrow ravine, where mist coiled like pale serpents between stone walls. As he neared the entrance, a sound stopped him steel against stone, followed by a muffled curse in the common tongue. Torian melted into the shadow of a boulder, arrow nocked, eyes fixed on the ravine's mouth. A figure emerged from the mist, tall and weather-worn, clad in travel-stained leathers and a dark cloak that had seen too many seasons. A man, but not of the common sort that occasionally ventured into elven lands. This one moved with the practiced caution of a hunter, hand resting on the hilt of a long sword at his hip. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing a stern face marked by a fresh cut across one cheek. A Swarmblood, one of the wandering rangers, descendants of Numerel, who guarded the forgotten places of the north. Torian remained motionless, watching as the man knelt to study the same tracks he had been following. The ranger's fingers hovered over the impressions, his expression darkening. He muttered something under his breath, then rose and scanned the surroundings with keen grey eyes. Those eyes found Torian despite his concealment. "I know you're there," the man called, his voice low but carrying clearly. "I mean no harm to the woodland realm or its people." Torian considered his options, then slowly rose from his hiding place, bow still half drawn. "You trespass close to elven lands, ranger." "I follow something that cares nothing for boundaries," the man replied. "As I suspect, do you?" He gestured to the tracks. unless you typically hunt game that walks on two legs and bleeds black ichor. Torian lowered his bow slightly, but didn't relax his guard. What is your name, Starblood? I am Arathon, son of Arahiel. He inclined his head in a respectful gesture that fell short of a bow. And you are far from your king's halls, elf. Torian of the woodland realm. He finally lowered his bow completely, though the arrow remained nocked. What brings a ranger this far east? Your kind usually keeps to the weather hills and the old northern roads. Arathon's expression grew grim. Reports of strange happenings. Livestock slaughtered but not eaten. Wells that run foul overnight. And whispers. He paused, eyes darting to the mist-shrouded ravine. Whispers of an ancient evil stirring in forgotten places. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crept along Torian's spine. The words echoed his own purpose too closely for comfort. These tracks, he said, nodding toward the ground. Have you seen their like before? Once, Arathon admitted. In the ruins of Furnost, where the Witch King once dwelled. But that was years ago, and farther west than any such creature should roam. He studied Torian with newfound interest. Your king must be concerned indeed to send one of his people so far alone. I am not alone, Torian replied automatically, the standard response of any scout who might be captured or questioned. Never reveal your true numbers. Arathon's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Of course not. Nor am I the lie hung between them, a strange moment of understanding. Before either could speak again, a low rumble shook the ground. They turned as one toward the western sky, where dark clouds had gathered with unnatural speed over the misty mountains. Lightning forked between the peaks, though no thunder followed idly that continuous, bone-deep rumble, like the growl of some massive beast. A storm comes, Torian said unnecessarily, feeling a strange dread at the sight. Elves rarely feared natural phenomena, but nothing about those clouds felt natural. No ordinary storm, Arathon muttered. His hand had returned to his sword hilt. We should seek shelter. These tracks will be lost soon enough. As if in answer, the wind rose suddenly, carrying a scent of decay and something else similar, ancient and cold. The first heavy drops began to fall, hissing where they struck stone. There are ruins nearby, Arathon said, raising his voice against the mounting gale. An outpost of Arna from before the kingdom's fall. I passed them yesterday. Torian hesitated. Centuries of distrust between elves and men couldn't be dismissed icily. Yet something told him this ranger might be valuable in whatever lay ahead. And the storm felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Lead on, he said finally. But know that I watch you, Starblood. Arathon nodded grimly. As I watch you, elf. Come might's not far. They set off at a run as the storm unleashed its fury. The rain turning to stinging pellets that seemed to burn where they touched exposed skin. The wind howled with voices that sounded almost like words in some forgotten tongue. The ruins appeared through the curtain of rain-crumbling walls of fitted stone, the remains of a watchtower perched on a rocky spur. They ducked through a partially collapsed archway into what had once been a great hall. now open to the sky except for one corner where part of the roof still clung to blackened beams. As they shook water from their cloaks, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the hall, followed by a deafening crack. The ground shook, and part of the outer wall collapsed, sealing the archway they had just entered. They were trapped inside. In the sudden silence that followed, Torian noticed something etched into the stone floor symbols, unlike any he had seen in his 3 centuries. They seemed to pulse faintly in the gloom, as if responding to the storm outside. "Arathon," he said quietly, "look." The ranger crouched beside the markings, his expression troubled. "These are not the work of Anna's masons." His fingers traced the air just above the symbols, not quite touching them. "This is older and darker." As they watched, a section of the far wall shuddered and collapsed inward, revealing a passage that, by all rights, shouldn't have existed in the original structure of the outpost. Cold air flowed from the opening, carrying the scent of age and secrets long buried. Arathon and Torian exchanged a look of suspicion, mingled with the shared curiosity that overrode their mutual distrust. "It seems," Torian said softly, "that we were meant to find this place." The storm raged outside, sealing them in with whatever waited in the darkness beyond. The passage beyond the collapsed wall stretched into darkness, its rough-hewn walls bearing no resemblance to the craftsmanship of the ruins above. Torian produced a small crystal from his belt pouch, light source favored by elven sand. Its soft blue glow revealed a descending tunnel cut directly into the bedrock. "This was not built by the men of Arnor," Torian said, examining the stonework. "The technique is different, older." Arathon nodded grimly, "and deliberately hidden." He ran his fingers along strange markings carved into the passage walls. "These are warnings." "You can read them?" Torian asked, surprised. "Not all," the ranger admitted, "but enough. My people preserve some knowledge of the old tongues." His expression darkened as he translated, "Beyond lies that which must not wake, and here sealed by blood and binding." A chill that had nothing to do with the damp air settled over them. Outside, the unnatural storm continued to rage, the sound muffled by tons of stone. "We have little choice but to go forward," Arathon said, drawing his sword. The blade caught the crystal's light, revealing intricate engravings along its length. "Unless you can move that collapsed entrance." Torian shook his head. "Even elven strength has limits." He knocked an arrow to his bow, though what good it might do against stone walls and ancient curses, he couldn't say. "Lead on, ranger. Your eyes may see what mine miss in these mannish ruins." They descended in tense silence, the passage gradually widening until it opened into a small antechamber. Here, the rough stonework gave way to precisely fitted blocks bearing the unmistakable star emblem of Arna, but strangely altered, intertwined with another symbol, a crown of iron thorns. "The mark of Morvel," Arathon whispered, his voice tight. "The Witch King's realm. Why would the builders of this outpost incorporate such a symbol?" Torian asked, unease growing within him. "Not incorporation," Arathon replied. "Containment." He pointed to where the symbols met. "See how the star of Arnor binds the crown. This was no Alion Sethis, was imprisonment. At the chamber's far end stood a door unlike any Taurian had seen in his 3 centuries. Black iron bands crossed ancient wood that showed no sign of rot despite the damp. Where the bands met at the center, they formed an intricate lock mechanism bearing both symbols they had seen before. "We should turn back," Taurian said, the words leaving his mouth even as he knew they couldn't. The collapsed entrance, the storm something wanted them here. Arathon approached the door slowly, studying the lock. "Listen," he said suddenly. Taurian stilled his breathing, his elven hearing stretching into the silence. Their faint but unmistakable vespers emanated from beyond the door. Not words, but the suggestion of them, like the memory of conversation. "Something lives beyond," he said. "Or something that remembers living," Arathon countered. He reached for the lock mechanism, then hesitated. "My instincts tell me to walk away from this door, elf. Yet I feel we were led here for purpose." "By what?" Taurian asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "By whatever watches the forgotten places of this world." Arathon's grey eyes met his. "The question is whether we trust that guidance." The whispers grew louder, almost eager. Taurian felt a strange compulsion to hear them more clearly, to understand what secrets they might share. "We open it," he decided, "but with caution. Stand ready with your blade." Arathon nodded and placed his hand on the lock. The mechanism responded to his touch with a series of metallic clicks, as if recognizing something in his blood. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a chamber that defied all expectations. Unlike the rough passages and practical stonework they had passed through, this room was a perfect circle, its walls polished to a mirror shine. The ceiling arched high above, painted with constellations that Taurian recognized from the night skies of an age-long past. The floor was inlaid with silver and black stone in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of one's eye. But it was the center of the chamber that drew their attention. There, arranged with deliberate precision, sat for objects on stone pedestals, a dagger of black metal, its blade etched with runes that seemed to absorb the light from Taurian's crystal, a mirror in a frame of twisted silver, its surface not reflecting but showing swirling mists, a book bound in what appeared to be dark leather, closed with 3 iron clasps, and a small box of silver and ivory, delicate filigree work depicting a battle between forces of light and shadow. "A ritual arrangement," Taurian whispered, the air in the chamber feeling thick and resistant, as if time itself moved differently here. Arathon circled the pedestals slowly, careful not to touch anything. These items were sealed away for a reason. He pointed to inscriptions at the base of each pedestal. "Can you read these? My knowledge of Elvish script is limited." Taurian knelt beside the pedestals, studying the ancient writing. "This is not Sindarin, but an older form." He frowned in concentration. "It speaks of the War of the Last Alliance, when elves and men fought together against Sauron, but also of another conflict, against the Witch King of Morval. My ancestors fought in those wars," Arathon said quietly. The star-blood stood with the elves when the darkness threatened to consume all. These relics, Torian continued, moving from one inscription to the next. They were created to contain something someone knew could not be destroyed by conventional means. He looked up at Arathon, troubled. A lieutenant of the Witch King, a being neither living nor dead, bound through ancient magic to these four objects, and sealed away here, beneath an outpost of Arnar. Arathon's expression was grim. Hidden and forgotten as the kingdom fell and the years passed. The whispers had grown louder since they entered, though still indistinct. They seemed to emanate not from any particular direction, but from the relics themselves, as if each held fragments of a consciousness straining to be whole. "We should leave them untouched," Torian said, rising to his feet. "Whatever is bound here should remain so." Arathon nodded in agreement, but his eyes lingered on the silver box. "These symbols," he said, pointing to markings along its edge, "they bear resemblance to the crest my family has carried for generations." He leaned closer, fascinated despite himself. "As if my ancestors were involved in this binding ritual." "All the more reason to leave it be," Torian warned, sensing danger in the ranger's curiosity. "Blood connections to ancient magic rarely end well in the tales of my people." But Arathon seemed drawn to the box, his hand moving toward it almost of its own accord. "I only wish to see Arathon know." Torian lunged forward, but too late. The ranger's fingers brushed the silver surface of the box. Instantly, all four relics pulsed with dark energy. The dagger's runes flared with sickly green light. The mirror's mists parted to show glimpses of a desolate landscape. The book's clasps snapped open with a sound like breaking bones, and the box itself began to emit a high, keening note that set Torian's teeth on edge. The entire chamber shuddered. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling as cracks appeared in the polished walls. "What have I done?" Arathon whispered, snatching his hand back. "We need to leave," Torian said urgently, grabbing the ranger's arm. "Now." But as they turned toward the door, it slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the trembling chamber. The whispers had become a chorus of voices, no longer indistinct, but speaking in a language that hurt the mind to hear. The ritual had begun, and they were trapped at its center. The chamber's trembling intensified. Hairline fractures spread across the polished walls like a web of dark veins, and the constellations painted on the ceiling began to bleed, droplets of midnight blue falling like rain. "The binding is breaking," Torian shouted over the cacophony of whispers and grinding stone. "We need to contain it." Arathon drew his sword, though what good steel might do against ancient magic, neither could say how. "I know nothing of elven bindings or containment spells." The mirror on its pedestal suddenly flared with sickly light. Its swirling mists parted to reveal visions of devastation, villages burning, forests withering, and figures writhing in torment. But most disturbing were the shadow forms that moved among the scenes of destruction. Tall, emaciated silhouettes with elongated limbs and faces like cracked porcelain masks. Voidwalkers, Torian breathed, ancient lore surfacing in his memory. Servants of what dwells between worlds, As if summoned by his recognition, the shadows in the mirror began to press against its surface. Their hands, too many fingers, too many joints pushing outward as if testing the boundary between reflection and reality. The mirror is a gateway, Arathon realized, backing away, and we've weakened its seal. A spindly hand breached the mirror's surface, reaching into the chamber with fingers that left trails of darkness in the air. The temperature plummeted, their breath fogging before them. Torian knocked an arrow and loosed it at the emerging figure. The shaft passed through the shadow form with no effect, embedding itself in the wall beyond. Physical weapons won't harm them, he warned, reaching for another arrow despite his words. We need something else. Arathon's eyes fell on the black dagger, its runes still pulsing with sickly light. If these relics were made to bind the entity, perhaps they can also repel its servants. Before Torian could protest, the ranger lunged forward and seized the dagger from its pedestal. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, he gasped in pain but held firm. Cold, he hissed through clenched teeth. Like winter in my veins. The shadow form had half emerged now, its upper body stretching impossibly as it pulled itself from the mirror. Its face was a featureless oval with only the suggestion of eyes dark hollows that seemed to draw in light rather than reflect it. Arathon raised the dagger, which now emitted a high-pitched keening. The shadow creature recoiled, its form rippling like disturbed water. It fears the blade, Torian observed, moving to Arathon's side, or recognizes it. More shadow forms pressed against the mirror's surface, eager to follow their brethren. The chambers, shaking, had become violent enough to throw them off balance, chunks of ceiling now crashing to the floor around them. We can't fight them all, Arathon said, keeping the dagger pointed at the partially emerged creature. And this place is coming down around us. Torian's gaze swept the chamber, assessing their options. The door remained sealed, the walls were cracking, and the relics, he said suddenly. If they were used in the binding ritual, they must contain the power to maintain it. We need to take them with us. Take them. Arathon looked incredulous, even as he backed away from another shadow hand reaching through the mirror. These things are evil, elf. And leaving them here to be claimed by these creatures would be worse, Torian countered. He moved to the book, its pages now fluttering open of their own accord, revealing text that shifted and changed as if alive. Cover me. Swallowing his revulsion, Torian grabbed the book, expecting the same cold shock Arathon had experienced. Instead, a rush of whispers filled his mind, fragments of knowledge, glimpses of rituals performed in darkness, and beneath it all, a presence ancient and patient. He slammed the book shut, the whispers receding but not disappearing entirely. The silver box, he called to Arathon. We need it too. The ranger, still wielding the dagger against the increasingly agitated shadow forms, looked torn. And the mirror. We can't take that it's a doorway for these things. A massive crack split the ceiling directly above the mirror's pedestal. With a thunderous crash, a section of stone broke free, plummeting toward the relic. Down, Torian shouted, diving away from the impact. The mirror shattered with a sound like 1,000 screams, fragments of silver and glass exploding outward. The shadow forms caught in the destruction dissipated into wisps of darkness that were quickly sucked back into the void, glimpsed beyond the broken frame. In the sudden silence that followed, Torian and Arathon picked themselves up from the debris-strewn floor. The chamber had stopped shaking, but the damage was extensive. Water trickled from cracks in the walls, and the ceiling threatened to collapse entirely. "The mirror is destroyed," Arathon said, breathing heavily. "But I don't think that's the end of it." "No," Torian agreed, clutching the book to his chest. "We've only delayed whatever was trying to come through." He nodded to the silver box, still intact on its pedestal. "Take it. We need to leave before this entire structure comes down." Arathon hesitated only briefly before securing the dagger in his belt and retrieving the box. As his fingers closed around it, his expression shifted, not pain this time, but recognition. "It knows me," he murmured, staring at the box. "Or my bloodline. All the more reason to keep it from whatever dwells in the void," Torian said, moving toward the chamber door. To his surprise, it swung open at his touch, as if the destruction of the mirror had broken whatever seal held it shut. They hurried back through the antechamber and up the ascending passage, the sounds of collapse following close behind. Chunks of ceiling crashed down mere steps behind them as they ran, the entire underground structure failing now that the binding magic had been disrupted. They burst into the ruined hall above, just as the passage behind them collapsed completely, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The storm outside had subsided, though the sky remained unnaturally dark. "We need to put distance between us and this place," Torian said, already moving toward a gap in the ruined walls. Arathon nodded grimly, following close behind. "Where?" "These things," he gestured to the relics they carried. "They're not safe anywhere." "There's a grove to the east," Torian replied, "sacred to my people. It may offer some protection while we decide what to do next." They picked their way through the ruins and out into the open air. The landscape around them had changed. Subtle trees that had been merely autumn bare now appeared withered and blackened, as if burned by invisible fire. The ground beneath their feet was dusted with a fine, ash-like substance that wasn't there before. "The corruption spreads," Arathon observed quietly. They set a punishing pace eastward, neither speaking of the weight they carried, both physical and metaphorical. The relics seemed to grow heavier with each step, and Torian could still hear the book's whispers at the edge of his consciousness, tempting him to open it again, to learn its secrets. They had traveled perhaps to leagues when Arathon suddenly stumbled, catching himself against a tree trunk. Arathon Torian turned back, concerned. The ranger's face had grown pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool air. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice strained. He pulled aside his cloak to reveal a tear in his tunicand beneath it, a wound Torian hadn't noticed in the chaos of their escape. It wasn't large, barely more than a scratch along his ribs, but the edges were black, and dark veins spread outward beneath the skin like the roots of some malevolent plant. "When did this happen?" Torian asked, kneeling to examine the wound. "In the chamber," Arathon replied, wincing as Torian's fingers probed gently around the blackened area. When the mirror shattered, I thought it was just glass, but shadow touch, Torian said grimly. The void creature's essence can corrupt living flesh. Arathan's expression hardened. How bad? Torian met his gaze directly. I don't know. My people have legends of such wounds, but I've never seen one. He glanced at the darkening sky. We need to reach the grove before nightfall. Can you continue? The ranger straightened, jaws set. I've marched with worse. He adjusted his cloak to cover the wound. Lead on, elf. Your sacred grove awaits. As they resumed their journey, Torian couldn't help but notice how Arathan's hand kept straying to the black dagger at his belt, fingers tracing its hilt as if drawn to it. The whispers from the book had grown louder too, more insistent. The relics were awakening, and with them, whatever had been bound beneath the ancient outpost of Arna. And somewhere in the gathering darkness behind them, shadows moved with purpose, following the trail of those who had disturbed their long imprisonment. The sacred grove appeared as twilight deepened, circle of ancient oaks whose massive trunks twisted skyward like pillars supporting the heavens. Even in the growing darkness, Torian could see that their leaves remained green and vital, untouched by the corruption that had begun to spread through the surrounding forest. The boundary is still strong here, he said, as they passed between two sentinel trees. The air changed immediately clearer, warmer, carrying the scent of moss and living things rather than the ashen decay that had followed them for miles. Arathan stumbled again, more severely this time. Torian caught him before he could fall, alarmed at the heat radiating from the ranger's body. The wound worsens, he said, helping Arathan to a stone at the grove's center. Let me see it. The ranger didn't protest as Torian carefully pulled aside his tunic. The shadow touch had spread, black veins now reaching from ribs to collarbone, the skin around them grey and lifeless. That bad? Arathan asked, his voice rough with pain. Torian didn't lie. Yes, he set down the book had been carrying and opened his travel pack, retrieving a small wooden box containing herbs and salves. I'm no healer, but all scouts of the woodland realm learn basic medicine. He selected dried leaves of Athelas and crushed them between his fingers, releasing their sharp, clean scent. This may help slow the spread. As he worked, applying the herb poultice to Arathan's wound and binding it with clean cloth, Torian was acutely aware of the relics they'd brought with them. The book lay on the moss nearby, its whispers momentarily quieter in this sacred place. The black dagger remained at Arathan's belt, its runes now dull and dormant, and the silver box sat beside the ranger, its delicate filigree catching what little light remained in the day. We need to understand what we're carrying, Torian said, finally, securing the bandage. And what awakened in that chamber? Arathan nodded grimly. The book can, you read it. Torian hesitated. I caught glimpses when I first touched it. Ancient rituals, fragments of knowledge, and something else. A presence. He glanced at the tome with undisguised wariness. Opening it fully may be dangerous. More dangerous than remaining ignorant of what we face. Arathon countered, his grey eyes fever bright but lucid. That shadow creature nearly came through. There may be others, and my wound he didn't need to finish the thought. After a moment's consideration, Torian nodded. You're right, but we do this carefully. He moved to the center of the grove, where a flat stone, worn smooth by centuries of use, served as a natural altar. This place has power of its own. It may offer some protection. He placed the book on the stone and, with deliberate movements, opened its cover. The pages within were made of some material thinner than parchment but more durable, covered in script that shifted between language ancient Sindarin, Quenya, the Black Speech, and others Torian couldn't identify. It's adapting to the reader, he murmured, fascinated despite his apprehension. Showing me what I can understand. Arathon moved to his side, peering at the pages. I see different text, he confirmed. In the common tongue, but archaic. They began to read in silence, each absorbing what the book revealed to them. The whispers that had plagued Torian since touching the tome now organized themselves into coherent thoughts, filling in gaps where the written word failed. It speaks of the war of the last alliance, Torian said after some time, but also of another conflict, less known to history. A shadow war fought against the Witch King's most terrible servants. The Void Walkers, Arathon added, his finger tracing a line of text. Beings he pulled from the spaces between worlds to serve him. Neither living nor dead, they could pass through solid matter and corrupt with a touch. Torian turned a page, revealing illustrations of the very creatures they had encountered limbs at, featureless faces, hands with too many joints. They were nearly unstoppable, until an alliance was formed. Arathon continued, the fever seeming to recede as he lost himself in the ancient account. Elves contributed their knowledge of binding magic, dwarves forged the physical anchors, and men, he paused, his expression troubled. Men provided the blood sacrifice needed to seal the ritual. Not just any men, Torian noted, reading further. Those of Numenorian descent. The wobblered Arathon's hand moved unconsciously to the silver box. My ancestors. They continued reading, piecing together the full history. After the Witch King's defeat, one of his lieutenants of being called Morathiel, once a Numenorian prince corrupted beyond recognition cold, not be destroyed by conventional means. Instead, an elaborate ritual was devised to bind him between worlds, using for relics as anchor points. The dagger to sever his connection to our world, Torian summarized. The mirror as a window to his prison. The book to contain the knowledge of the binding. And the box holds a portion of his essence. Arathon finished grimly. Sealed with the blood of my forefather. He looked up from the pages, his face pale in the fading light. When I touched it in the chamber, it recognized the same bloodline, and began to wake, Torian added. But the ritual was incomplete. The mirror's destruction interrupted whatever was happening. They fell silent, contemplating the implications. Night had fully fallen, but the grove remained illuminated by a soft, silvery light that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. We need help, Arathon finally said. Knowledge beyond what this book can provide. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "There's a settlement not far from here, Frostallow. Small, but old. They may have records or tales passed down." Torian closed the book carefully. "You're in no condition to travel. In no condition to sit idle while this shadow touch spreads," the ranger countered. "And we can't stay here forever. This grove may be safe for now, but for how long?" Torian couldn't argue with that logic. The corruption they'd witnessed was spreading, and to lone traveler Savan, an elf, and a Starblood cult hoped to contain it alone. "We'll rest tonight," he decided, "regain our strength, and tomorrow we seek this Frostallow." They made camp beneath the ancient oaks, the relics placed carefully at the edge of their small fire. Neither slept deeply Arathon because of his wound. Torian because he didn't trust the whispers that still echoed at the edges of his consciousness. Dawn came with a thin, watery light that did little to dispel the sense of wrongness that had settled over the land. As they prepared to leave the grove, Torian checked Arathon's wound again. The poultice had slowed the spread of the shadow touch, but not stopped it. Dark veins now reached the ranger's neck, and his skin had taken on an ashen pallor. "How far to Frostallow?" Torian asked as they gathered their belongings. "Half a day's march," Arathon replied, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "Less, if we push hard." They set out eastward, the relics distributed between them, Torian carrying the book, Arathon the dagger and silver box. The forest grew thicker as they traveled, but in a sickly way, trees crowding together with twisted limbs and blackened bark. More than once, Torian spotted wildlife fleeing their approach end in natural fear. But in blind panic, as if sensing the corruption they carried, by midday they crested a ridge that overlooked a small valley. Nestled within it lay Frostallow, cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by fields now harvested for winter. Smoke rose from chimneys, and tiny figures moved about their daily tasks, unaware of the darkness approaching their quiet lives. "They seem untouched by what's happening," Torian observed. "For now," Arathon replied grimly, "but not for long, if we fail." They descended toward the village, but Arathon held up a hand before they reached the first outlying farms. "We should conceal the relics," he said, "and my wound. These are simple folk who fear what they don't understand." Torian nodded in agreement. They wrapped the book and box in cloth, and Arathon adjusted his cloak to hide both the dagger and his bandaged torso. Only his pallor and the dark circles beneath his eyes hinted at his condition. The villagers regarded them with suspicion as they enter Redknot, unexpected, given the isolated nature of the settlement and the unusual pairing of elf and ranger. They made their way to what appeared to be the village center, where a large hall stood. An elderly man emerged from the hall as they approached, his back straight despite his years, his beard white but neatly trimmed. He carried a staff of dark wood, topped with a small iron cage containing a glowing crystallar mark of office or authority, Torian guessed. "Strangers come to Frostallow," the elder said, his voice carrying across the square and drawing the attention of nearby villagers. "An elf of the woodland and a ranger of the north." unusual traveling companions in these troubled times. Arathon stepped forward, offering a respectful bow. We seek knowledge that may be preserved in your settlement, elder. Tales of the old days. Perhaps records kept since the time of Anna. The elder's bushy eyebrows rose. And what knowledge would that be, Ranger? What brings you so far from your usual paths? Before Arathon could answer, a commotion broke out at the village edge. Shouts of alarm rose, and people began running toward the hall. A young man burst through the gathering crowd, his face pale with fear. "Elder Tormand," he cried, "the eastward it's wrong." The trees, there he broke off, struggling for words. "They're dying, but not natural-like. And there's tracks, strange tracks, heading this way." The elder's expression hardened. "How long ago?" "Just now," the young man panted. "I was checking the trap lines when I saw it. Something moved in the shadows, elder. Something that walked like a man but wasn't." Torian and Arathon exchanged a grim look. The corruption was spreading faster than they'd anticipated, and the Void Walkers were on their trail. Elder Arathon said urgently, "The danger your man speaks of, know of it. That's why we've come. But we need information to fight it." Elder Tormund studied them with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, not Arathon's pallor, nor the careful way they guarded their packs. "What do you know of this darkness, Ranger?" "Enough to fear it," Arathon replied honestly. "But not enough to stop it. Not yet." The elder was silent for a long moment, weighing his options as the villagers murmured anxiously around them. Finally, he nodded. "There is one who might help you. Not of our village, but nearby. A hermit scholar who dwells in the hills to the north. He keeps records older than Frostarlo itself." "Will he speak with us?" Torian asked. "For the right questions, perhaps." The elder pointed toward a path leading out of the village. "Follow the north trail until it forks at the lightning-struck oak. Take the left path up into the hills. His dwelling is built into the cliffsy du. Can't miss it." His expression grew grave. "But be warned, Haleth values his solitude and doesn't suffer fools gladly." "Thank you, Elder," Arathon said with another bow. "We'll leave immediately." As they turned to go, Elder Tormand called after them, "Whatever darkness follows you, Stranger Stone not bring it back to Frost. We are simple folk with simple defenses." "Well, do what we can," Torian promised, though he feared it might be a promise they couldn't keep. They left the village at a brisk pace, aware of the eyes following their departure. The north trail wound through harvested fields before entering another stretch of forest, this one still healthy, though Torian could sense a wrongness at its edges, like the first touch of frost on summer leaves. "The hermit scholar," Arathon said as they walked. "Have you heard of such a man?" "No," Torian admitted. "But it's not unusual for some men to seek solitude for study. Your race has shorter lives, but burning curiosity." They reached the lightning-struck oak as the afternoon waned. The massive tree had been split down the middle by some long-ago storm, its two halves now growing in different directions like twisted horns. The path forked just beyond it, and they took the left branch as instructed, climbing steadily into the hills. The terrain grew rockier, the trees giving way to scrub and lichen-covered boulders. As the path rounded a bend, they saw a dwelling built partially into the cliff face, its wooden front weathered to the same grey as the stone. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney, and a small garden of hardy herbs clung to terraced beds beside the structure. But something was wrong. The door hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. No lights showed in the windows despite the gathering dusk. Torian held up a hand, signaling caution. Something's happened here. Arathon drew the black dagger, its runes flickering to life at his touch. Recently, he agreed, nodding toward disturbed earth and scuff marks around the entrance. They approached slowly, alert for any movement. The interior of the hermit's dwelling was a single large room, walls lined with shelves overflowing with books, scrolls, and strange artifacts. A large table dominated the center, covered with open texts and writing implements, and blood, dark spatters across the parchments, a larger pool soaking into the wooden floor. A struggle, Torian said, examining the scene. Chairs were overturned, shelves emptied in haste or violence, but no body. Arathon knelt beside the blood pool, his expression grim. A trail, he said, pointing to droplets leading toward the back of the dwelling. Someone was wounded and taken or fled. The blood trail led to a small door set into the rear wall entrance to the cave portion of the dwelling. It stood ajar, darkness beyond. We follow, Torian decided, drawing his bow carefully. The cave extended deeper into the hillside than expected, widening into chambers where the hermit had stored more books and supplies. The blood trail continued, joined now by strange, ashen footprints that matched no creature Torian knew. Voidwalkers, Arathon whispered, his grip tightening on the dagger. They found him first. The trail led them to a final chamber where a crack in the ceiling allowed a shaft of fading daylight to penetrate. There, propped against the far wall, they found the hermit. He was an old man, his white hair matted with blood from a wound at his temple. His robes, once fine but long mended, were torn and stained. But most disturbing was the shadow touch spreading across his exposed skin, far more advanced than Arathon's, turning the old man's flesh translucent in places, revealing darkness where blood should flow. Incredibly, he was still alive. His eyes fluttered open as they approached, cloudy with pain but aware. Too late, he rasped, his voice barely audible. They've found it. The way back. Torian knelt beside him, offering water from his flask. Who are you? What did they take? The hermit drank weakly, then pushed the flask away. Haleth, once of Gondor, scholar of forgotten histories. His gaze sharpened as he took in Torian's features. An elf, and his eyes shifted to Arathon, widening slightly. A star blood, of course. It would be the blood that calls them. What do you know of the Voidwalkers? Arathon asked urgently. And their master, Morathiel. A rattling laugh escapes the dying scholar. So you know that much, good. He coughed, black fluid speckling his lips. They serve what sleeps beneath prince who fell, bound but never broken. We found relics, Torian said. a dagger, a book, a silver box, and a mirror now destroyed. The anchors, Haleth whispered, the 4 points of the binding star. His hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping Arathan's wrist. They need all 4 to complete the ritual. The mirror's destruction buys time, but they will find another way. How do we stop them? Arathan asked, not pulling away despite the shadow touch visible on the hermit's fingers. You don't, Haleth said, his voice fading. You rebind. But the knowledge, he coughed again, more violently. The full ritual, not in your book. Incomplete. Where, then? Torian pressed. Where is the complete knowledge? The hermit's eyes were closing, his breathing shallow. The outpost, hidden, east of the misty mountains, where elves kept watch in the Second Age. His fingers fumbled at his belt, withdrawing a small, worn leather case. Map, my life's search. Torian took the case carefully. Inside was a folded parchment, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved. Go, Haleth whispered, his voice now barely audible. They follow, the void walkers, and Worsether, master stirs. His clouded eyes found Arathan's. Your blood calls to him, star blood, the same blood that bound him. How do I stop the shadow touch? Arathan asked, gesturing to his own wound and then to the hermit's advanced corruption. A ghost of a smile touched Haleth's lips. You don't. You use it. The connection goes both ways. His eyes closed. Now go. I die, but not alone. If set a trap for any who follow. They saw it then small clay pots arranged around the chamber, connected by thin fuses that led to the hermit's hand. Oil pooled beneath them, its sharp scent filling the air. He means to burn it all, Torian realized, himself included. A scholar to the end, Arathan said grimly, denying knowledge to the enemy. They left Haleth to his final act of defiance, making their way back through the cave and out into the open air. Night had fallen completely now, the stars obscured by clouds that seemed to hang unnaturally low. As they descended the path away from the hermit's dwelling, a muffled boom echoed from behind them. Orange light flared briefly at the cave entrance, then died away, leaving only darkness and a thin trail of smoke rising against the night sky. The map, Arathan said, as they picked their way carefully down the hillside. What does it show? Torian unfolded the parchment, studying it in the dim starlight that his elven eyes could still perceive. A journey east, beyond the misty mountains, to a place called the Silent Watcherson Outpost established during the war against Sauron. How far? Many days' travel, Torian admitted, through increasingly dangerous lands. Arathan nodded grimly, one hand unconsciously moving to his wounded side. Then Wed, best start now. The hermit was right there following, and I can feel them getting closer. As if in confirmation, a distant howl rose from the forest behind them. Not the cry of any natural wolf, but a sound that seemed to come from multiple throats at once, harmonizing in a way that sent chills down even Torian's spine. The hunt begins, he said quietly. They quickened their pace to figures moving through the darkness. carrying ancient burdens toward an uncertain destination behind them. Shadows gathered, hungry for what they bore. The forest grew darker as Torian and Arathan fled eastward, following game trails and shallow streams to mask their scent. The howls of their pursuers echoed through the night, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close. If the creatures could traverse space in ways that defied natural law. "They're toying with us," Arathon muttered as they paused briefly to catch their breath in the shelter of a massive fallen oak. The ranger's condition had worsened. The shadow touch now visibly pulsed beneath his skin with each heartbeat, and his breathing had grown labored. "Conserve your strength," Torian advised, scanning the darkness around them. His elven sight pierced the gloom, revealing a forest transformed by corruption. Trees that had been merely sickly at dusk now bore twisted limbs that reached toward them like grasping hands. The undergrowth had taken on a strange, ashen quality, crumbling to dust where they stepped. "The map," Arathan said, ignoring the advice. "How far to this elven outpost?" Torian retrieved the parchment from his tunic, studying it again. 3 days hard travel, if we can maintain this pace. But first we must cross the East Road, then the Weather Hills. "I may not have 3 days," Arathan admitted, his voice steady despite the grim assessment. He pulled aside his cloak, revealing the extent of the shadow touch. It had spread across his chest and down his arm, the flesh beneath turning translucent in places, showing darkness where blood should flow, just as they had seen with the dying hermit. Torian's expression remained neutral, but concern flickered in his eyes. "The Athalas slows it, but cannot stop it. We need to reach the outpost." A howl rose from the forest behind them, closer than before. They exchanged a glance and rose without further discussion, continuing their flight through the corrupted woodland. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous as the night wore on. Roots erupted from the earth to snag their feet. Branches whipped at their faces despite the lack of wind, and more than once they had to detour around pools of viscous black liquid that bubbled and steamed in the cold air. "The land itself turns against us," Torian observed as they skirted yet another such pool. "Not the land," Arathon corrected grimly. "What infects it?" He gestured to the black dagger at his belt, its runes glowing with sickly light. "These relics spread corruption by their very nature. Yet we cannot abandon them," Torian reminded him. "They are the key to rebinding what we've unleashed." Dawn approached, though the sky lightened only marginally, the sun a pale disk barely visible through unnatural haze. They had reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to rolling moorland. In the distance, a thin line cut across the landscape's east road, their first landmark. "We should rest," Torian suggested, noting Arathan's increasingly unsteady gait. "Find shelter for the day and continue at nightfall." The ranger shook his head stubbornly. "The Voidwalkers will not stop with daylight. And he hesitated. "I can feel them, Torian, through this wound. They're closer than their howls suggest." Before Torian could respond, a sound from behind made them both turn a wet, sliding noise, like something massive dragging itself across damp earth. The undergrowth at the forest edge rippled and parted. "Run," Arathan said quietly, drawing his sword with his good arm now. But it was too late. The creature that emerged was unlike the shadow forms they had glimpsed in the mirror chamber. This was solid, horrifyingly sore mass of twisted flesh and bone that only vaguely resembled the animals it had once been. Wolf, bear, and deer merged into a chimeric abomination, multiple eyes blinking independently across its misshapen head, too many limbs propelling it forward with unnatural speed. Corruption given form, Torian breathed, knocking an arrow to his bow. The creature charged. Torian's arrow struck true, embedding itself in what might have been a throat, but the monster didn't slow. Arathan met its rush with his sword, the ancient blade slicing through corrupted flesh that parted like smoke before reforming. "Physical weapons are useless," Torian called, firing another arrow to equally little effect. Arathan's face contorted with effort as he drove the creature back with a series of desperate swings. "The dagger," he grunted. "It responds to these things." Without hesitation, he sheathed his sword and drew the black dagger. The runes along its blade flared brilliantly, and the creature recoiled with a shriek that sounded like multiple animals dying at once. "Go," Arathan ordered, advancing on the now-retreating abomination. "I'll hold it here." "I won't leave you," Torian replied, moving to the ranger's side with another arrow ready. "You must," Arathan insisted. "The book and the map there, more important than either of us. Find the outpost. Learn how to end this." Before Torian could argue further, more sounds emerged from the forest, same wet, sliding noise multiplied. More corrupted beasts were coming. "This isn't a request," Elf Arathan said, his voice hardening. "This is the mission now. Divide and survive." Torian hesitated only a moment longer before nodding grimly. "East, across the weather hills. The silent watchers. I'll find it, and I'll find you," Arathan promised, "when I'm done here." They both knew it might be a lie, but neither acknowledged it. With a final nod, Torian turned and sprinted across the open moorland toward the east road, the book secure in his pack, the map tucked against his chest. Behind him, he heard Arathan's battle cry, followed by the unearthly shrieks of corrupted beasts. He did not look back, though every instinct urged him to return and fight alongside the ranger. Some battles could not be won by standing together. Torian covered ground with the tireless grace of his kind, feet barely seeming to touch the earth as he ran. The east road appeared before him, a pale line cutting through the moor. He crossed it without slowing, heading for the low hills visible on the horizon. The sun climbed higher, though its light remained weak and diffuse through the strange haze that had settled over the land. Torian maintained his pace, aware that while the corrupted beasts pursued Arathan, the Void Walkers themselves might still be tracking the relics. As if summoned by the thought, a shadow flickered at the corner of his vision. He turned his head sharply, but saw nothing gunly moorland grass rippling in a wind that carried the scent of decay. Another flicker, this time to his right. Torian nocked an arrow, continuing to move, but more cautiously now. The shadows were hunting him. He reached the first of the weather hills by midday, the gentle slope offering little cover but better visibility. From this vantage, he could see for miles in all directions forest behind him, now a dark smudge on the horizon, the east road cutting across the landscape, and ahead, the rolling hills that would eventually give way to the foothills of the misty mountains. No sign of pursuit was visible, yet Torian felt watched. The book in his pack seemed heavier, its whispers more insistent now that he was alone. He resisted the urge to take it out, to consult its pages for guidance. The hermit had warned that it was incomplete, and Torian had seen enough of its contents to know it was dangerous in its own right. He continued eastward, moving from hill to hill, always scanning his surroundings. The terrain grew rockier, dotted with ancient standing stones, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Some bore carvings so old that even Torian, with his knowledge of ancient scripts, could not decipher them. As afternoon waned, he spotted movement in a valley between two hills, the flickering shadows that had stalked him earlier, but solid figures moving with purpose. He dropped to a crouch, using a boulder for cover as he observed. A group of men, perhaps a dozen, dressed in mismatched armor and furs. They moved in formation, weapons ready, scanning the hills around them. Hunters, but not for game. Torian weighed his options. Circumventing them would cost precious time, but confrontation was risky. As he watched, one of the men pointed toward the hill where Torian hid, saying something to his companions. They changed direction, heading directly for his position. They had spotted him somehow. Torian prepared to flee, but paused when he noticed something odd about the men's movements. They walked with strange, jerking motions, as if their joints didn't bend properly, and their faces, visible now as they drew closer, were unnaturally pale, with eyes that reflected light like a cat's. Not men, not anymore. Torian backed away from his hiding place, moving silently along the ridgeline. The corrupted menfor, that was what they must be, continued their approach, spreading out to cut off possible escape routes. They were hunting with intelligence, not the blind aggression of the forest abominations. A flicker of shadow caught Torian's attention again, this time manifesting more clearly a tall, emaciated figure standing atop a nearby hill. It wore ancient armor, black and pitted with age, and upon its head sat a crown of what appeared to be iron thorns. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval, save for two deep hollows where eyes should be. A void walker, but different from those they had glimpsed in the mirror chamber, more present, more powerful. It raised a hand, pointing directly at Torian, and the corrupted men changed course again, converging on his position with renewed purpose. Torian abandoned stealth for speed, racing along the ridgeline toward a cluster of standing stones that might offer better cover. Arrows whistled past him, fired by the hunting party below. One grazed his arm, leaving a burning sensation unlike any wound he had experienced before. He reached the standing stone as a circle of ancient monoliths surrounding a flat altar stone, a place of power once, though whether dedicated to light or darkness, he couldn't tell. He took cover behind the largest stone, checking the graze on his arm. The wound was small but discolored, the edges already darkening with the telltale sign of shadow. The corrupted men approached the stone circle cautiously, spreading out to surround it. They moved with eerie coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. Above them, on the hilltop, the crowned Voidwalker watched, its hollow eyes fixed on Torian's hiding place. Trapped and outnumbered, Torian knew he couldn't fight his way out, not against enemies immune to normal weapons, and certainly not with the shadow touch already beginning to spread from his wound. He needed another way. The book. The whispers had grown louder, more coherent, as if proximity to danger had awakened something within its pages. Against his better judgment, Torian removed it from his pack, opening it to where a thin ribbon marked their previous reading. The text shifted before his eyes, rearranging itself into passages he hadn't seen before. Rituals of concealment, wards against the servants of darkness. Antheria description of the standing stones scattered throughout the northern lands. Waypoints, Torian read, understanding dawning. Anchors for those who walk between worlds. The corrupted men had reached the edge of the stone circle. They moved with greater caution now, as if the ancient monoliths presented some barrier to them. The Voidwalker on the hilltop remained motionless, watching. Torian studied the altar stone at the circle's center, noting symbols carved into its surface that matched illustrations in the book. This was no coincidence that had been led here, either by fate or by some intelligence within the relics themselves. The book described a ritual, simple but requiring blood freely given. A way to use the standing stones as they were intended, as gateways between distant points. With no time to hesitate, Torian drew his knife and cut his palm, letting blood drip onto the altar stone as he spoke words in a language older than Sindarin, older perhaps than elves themselves. The blood sizzled where it touched the stone, seeping into grooves that began to glow with a pale blue light. The corrupted men rushed forward suddenly, as if sensing what he attempted. Torian continued the ritual, his voice rising as he completed the final phrase. The standing stones responded, each beginning to hum with the same blue light that now covered the altar. A corrupted man reached the inner circle, weapon raised to strike. Torian met his gaze human once, now just a vessel for something else. The eyes reflected not just light, but the same darkness he had seen spreading through Arathan's wound. Morithil, the creature hissed, the name distorted by a mouth no longer designed for human speech. He comes, he remembers, he hungers. The standing stones flared blindingly bright. Torian felt a sensation like falling, though his feet remained firmly on the ground. The world around him, the corrupted men, the watching Voidwalker, the weather hills themselves seemed to stretch and distort. Then darkness, complete and absolute. When light returned, Torian found himself standing in another stone circle, identical in arrangement but in a completely different location. Mountains rose around him, their peaks lost in low clouds. A forest of pine and fir stretched below, untouched by the corruption he had witnessed in the west. He had traveled leagues in an instant, using ancient magic he barely understood. The book had guided him truth this time, but the cost was yet to be determined. Torian examined his arm where the arrow had grazed him. The shadow touch had spread, a palm-sized patch of skin now darkened and slightly translucent. Not immediately life-threatening, but a reminder of what pursued Hymond, what had likely claimed Arathon. The thought of the ranger facing those corrupted beasts alone sent a pang of regret through Torian. They had been strangers mere days ago, distrustful of each other by the weight of history between their peoples. Now Arathon might be deader, worse having sacrificed himself to ensure Torian's escape with the relics. "I will make it count," Torian promised quietly, orienting himself using the mountains as reference. According to the hermit's map, the Silent Watchers should be less than a day's journey from here, nestled in a hidden valley to the southeast. As he set off down the mountainside, Torian was acutely aware of the book in his pack. Its whispers momentarily quieted after the ritual, but still present at the edges of his consciousness. It had saved him, yes, but at what price? And what other secrets did it contain that might prove equally double? The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. Torian moved swiftly through the gathering darkness, alone now, but carrying the burden of two. Whatever awaited at the Silent Watchers, he would face it for Athen, for the lands already falling to corruption, and for a world that didn't yet know the danger awakening in its forgotten places. The forest at the mountain's base was eerily silent. No birds called, no insects chirped, though Torian could see no signs of the corruption that had infected the western lands. This silence was differential, ancient, as if the very trees held their breath in anticipation. Torian moved cautiously, following a barely visible path that wound between massive pines. According to the hermit's map, the Silent Watchers lay in a hidden valley ahead, but the exact route was marked with cryptic symbols rather than clear directions. A test, perhaps, or a precaution against the map falling into enemy hands. The shadow touch on his arm pulsed with dull pain, a constant reminder of what pursued him. Torian paused to apply more athelas from his dwindling supply, binding the wound with fresh cloth. The herb's clean scent momentarily drowned out the whispers from the book, giving him clarity of thought he hadn't realized had been missing. As night deepened, Torian became aware of subtle changes in his surroundings. The trees grew more orderly, their placement suggesting deliberate planting rather than natural growth. Occasional stone markers appeared along the path, weathered almost beyond recognition but bearing traces of elvish script. He was close. A snap of breaking wood shattered the silence. Torian froze, bow drawn in one fluid motion, eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing moved, yet he felt watched not by the malevolent presence that had stalked him across the weather hills, but by something else. "I know you're there," he said quietly in Sindarin. "I seek the Silent Watchers. I come with urgent need." Silence answered him, but the feeling of being observed intensified. Torian waited, arrow nocked but pointed at the ground, gesture of caution rather than aggression. The attack came without warning, not from the trees where head sensed watchers, but from the earth itself. The ground beneath his feet erupted, sending him sprawling as figures burst from concealed pits. They moved with military precision, surrounding him before he could regain his footing. Dwarves, half a dozen, clad in leather and mail, axes and hammers raised. Their beards were elaborately braided, marked with beads of different metals, signifying clan and rank. Their eyes, reflecting the faint starlight, held no welcome. An elf, far from the woodland, growled the foremost dwarf, his accent thick but his western understandable, carrying something that reeks of dark magic. He gestured to Torian's pack with his warhammer. "Explain yourself before we separate your head from your shoulders." Torian slowly lowered his bow, keeping his movements deliberate. "I am Torian of the Woodland Realm. I seek the silent Watcherson, ancient elven outpost that should lie in these mountains." The dwarves exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable behind thick beards. "And what business," asked their leader, "does a woodland elf have with ruins so far from his trees? The kind that concerns all free peoples." Torian replied evenly, "A darkness stirs in the west. Ancient bindings weaken. I carry knowledge that may help contain it, but it is incomplete." The dwarf leader studied him with narrowed eyes, then nodded to one of his companions. The second dwarf approached cautiously, holding what appeared to be a crystal mounted on a short metal rod. He passed it slowly over Torian, the crystal flickering with blue-white light. "He carries corruption," the dwarf announced, pointing to Torian's bandaged arm. "Shadow touch, but not yet claimed by it." The crystal flared brightly as it passed near Torian's pack. And something else, something old, powerful. "The book," Torian confirmed. "One of 4 relics used in a binding ritual long ago. The others are lost or in enemy hands." The leader's expression darkened. "Binding ritual? What manner of fool meddles with such things?" "Not by choice," Torian said. "My companion and I discovered them hidden beneath an outpost of Arnor. The binding was already weakening. Now the servants of what was bound pursue us Voidwalkers, they're called." At this, the dwarves visibly tensed, hands tightening on weapons. The leader made a sign against evil, touching his forehead, heart, and both shoulders in quick succession. "Voidwalkers," he repeated, the words heavy with recognition. "Not seen in these lands since the fall of Mor." He studied Torian with new intensity. "You speak truth, elf. Or believe you do. Either way, you cannot remain here. The valley ahead is under our protection. You guard the silent watchers?" Torian asked, surprised. Relations between elves and dwarves had been strained for ages. The dwarves would protect an elven outpost was unexpected. "We guard what lies beneath it," the leader corrected. "The deep forge of Durin's folk. The elven ruins above are merely convenient markers." Another dwarf stepped forward, this one older, his beard white but his arms still corded with muscle. "Thrain, perhaps we should hear more," he suggested. "If Voidwalkers truly walk again, our own halls may be at risk." The leader Thrain at this, then nodded reluctantly. "Speak then, elf. Tell us of these relics and what you've unleashed." Torian explained as concisely as he could discovery of the hidden chamber. The 4 relics, the partial awakening of Morathil, and their desperate flight westward. He told of Arathan's sacrifice to ensure his escape with the book and map, and of the hermit scholar's dying words about the silent watchers. As he spoke, the dwarf's expressions grew increasingly grim. When he finished, silence hung heavy in the night air. The Morgul cast weapons, the elder dwarf said finally. That's what our law names them. Forged in darkness but turned against their maker. Thrain nodded slowly. The black dagger you describe have seen its like before. In the deep places of the world, where ancient evils were sealed away, he exchanged looks with his companions. Balin, what say you? Does he go to the council? The white-bearded dwarf, Balin studied Torian thoughtfully. The shadow touch spreads on him. He has little time, and if what he says is true, neither do we. He nodded decisively. To the council, let them decide. Council, Torian asked. Not your concern yet, Thrain replied brusquely. First, we treat that wound properly. Athela slows the corruption, but cannot stop it. We have other methods. Before Torian could respond, a distant howl echoed through the mountains. Same unnatural multi-throated cry he had heard in the western forests. The dwarves tensed, weapons raised. They followed, Torian said, rising to his feet. Faster than should be possible. The book guides them to you, Balin said grimly, as it guided you here. Such artifacts have will of their own. Thrain barked orders in Kuzdal, the secret dwarf tongue. His companions moved, with practiced efficiency, to taking positions as rear guard while the others formed around Torian. We move now, Thrain told him. Keep up or be left behind. They set a punishing pace through the forest, following paths invisible to Torian's eyes, but clearly familiar to the dwarves. The howls continued, sometimes fading, sometimes drawing nearer, as if their pursuers tested the boundaries of some unseen protection. After nearly an hour of hard travel, they reached a sheer cliff face. Thrain approached what appeared to be a solid rock wall, pressed his hand to a specific point, and murmured words in Kuzdal. A seam appeared in the stone, widening to reveal a passage large enough for them to enter single file. Few outsiders have seen what lies beyond, Balin told Torian as they prepared to enter. Consider it a measure of our desperation that we bring you here, elf. The passage beyond was no rough mine tunnel, but a perfectly shaped corridor. Its walls smooth and inlaid with veins of some glittering mineral that provided soft illumination. They descended steadily, the air growing warmer but not stale evidence of the sophisticated ventilation systems for which dwarven engineers were renowned. The corridor opened suddenly into a vast cavern that took even Torian's breath away. Suspended bridges of stone and metal connected multiple levels carved into the living rock. Dwellings, forges, and workshops occupied terraced platforms, while far below, a subterranean river flowed, harnessed in places to power massive water wheels. The deep forge, Thrain announced with undisguised pride. Hidden sanctuary of Durin's folk since the Second Age. Dwarves moved purposefully throughout the complex, many pausing to stare at the unexpected visitor in their midst. Torian noted that unlike the surface party, many of these dwarves were not warriors but craftsmen, scholars, and ordinary folk going about their lives in this hidden realm. They crossed one of the suspended bridges, its surface carved with runes that glowed faintly as they passed. Torian felt a subtle shift, as if passing through some form of barrier. The whispers from the book in his pack abruptly silenced. Wards of containment, Balin explained, noting Torian's reaction. Nothing of dark power can reach beyond this point in or out. They led him to a chamber carved into the cavern's far wall. Unlike the functional spaces they had passed, this room was clearly designed for council and ceremony. A circular table of polished stone dominated the center, surrounded by seats of varying designs, some clearly dwarvish, but others sized for taller beings. And there were others waiting. To Torian's surprise, the chamber already held occupants. 2 men clad in the rough garb of woodsmen, their weathered faces suggesting lives spent in wild places, and most surprisingly, another elf not of the woodland realm, but of Rivendell, judging by his attire. Torian of the woodland realm, Thrain announced formally, bearing news of voidwalkers and awakened relics. And this, he gestured to the others present, is what remains of the watchful council. Guardians of secrets best forgotten by the outside world. The Rivendell elf rose, inclining his head in greeting. I am Erister, emissary of Lord Elrond. These are Haleth and Gundahar, of the woodsmen who guard the eastern approaches. His eyes narrowed as he studied Torian. You bear shadow touch, kinsman. And something else, something that should have remained buried. The Book of Binding, Torian confirmed, removing it carefully from his pack and placing it on the table. Even here, within the wards, it seemed to absorb light from its surroundings. One of 4 relics used to imprison a lieutenant of the Witch Kinga, being called Morathil. A ripple of recognition passed through the council members. Balin stepped forward, his expression grave. The name is known to us, he said. Our records speak of an Eminorian prince, corrupted by the Witch King, neither living nor dead, who commanded the Voidwalkers. He was bound through great sacrifice after the fall of Mordor, and now awakens, added Haleth, the elder of the 2 woodsmen. We have seen signs in the east wildlife, fleeing westward, waters turning foul, shadows moving against the wind. My companion and I discovered the binding chamber by chance, Torian explained. The relics were already stirring. When touched, they began to wake fully. He described again the events at the ruined outpost, the escape with the relics, and their subsequent flight eastward. Arathana, Starblood Renga, stayed behind to ensure I could reach you with the book and the knowledge of what we face. A Starblood Arista's interest sharpened. That is significant. The binding ritual required blood of that lineage. So the hermit scholar told us before he died, Torian confirmed. He directed us here to the Silent Watchers, saying the complete ritual of binding would be preserved in your records. The council members exchanged troubled glances. Finally, Balin spoke. The Silent Watchers lie above Usan, elven outpost, built to guard what we dwarves guard from below. The complete ritual is indeed preserved there, but he hesitated. It requires all 4 relics, and blood freely given by one of the same line that performed the original binding. Arathon carried the dagger and a silver box, Torian said. The 4th relic, a mirror, was destroyed in our escape. Then the ritual cannot be completed as written, Arista said grimly. Without all 4 anchors, the binding will be incomplete at best, temporary at worst. Silence fell over the council as the implications sank in. Finally, Gundahar, the younger woodsman who had remained silent until now, spoke up. What of this ranger, Arathon? If he lives and still possesses 2 of the relics, could he not join us here? If he lives, Torian repeated quietly. He faced corrupted beasts to ensure my escape, and he bore shadow touch worse than mine. Yet you said the silver box recognized his bloodline, Balin pointed out. That suggests he is directly descended from those who performed the original binding. Such a connection might grant him resilience. Hope stirred in Torian for the first time since their separation. Is there a way to know? To see if he still lives? Arista and Balin exchanged looks. Perhaps, the elf said carefully. The Silent Watchers contains artifacts of seeing Farseers. They were called. With the proper focus, something connected to this Erethanol might glimpse his fate. But first, Thrain interrupted. We must treat your wound, elf. The shadow touch spreads, even now, despite our wards. Torian glanced at his arm, where dark veins had indeed crept beyond the bandage. The pain had dulled to a cold numbness that was somehow more concerning. The woodsmen have a treatment, Balin explained. Temporary, but more effective than Athilus alone. It will buy us time to consult the records above and determine our course. Heleth nodded, already retrieving components from a pouch at his Belthorb's Torian didn't recognize. Crushed crystals, and a vial of clear liquid that caught the light strangely. This will not be pleasant, the woodsman warned, but it will slow the corruption. As Haleth prepared the treatment, Arista approached Torian, speaking low in their shared tongue. There is more at stake than they know, he murmured. Lord Elrond foresaw darkness rising from forgotten bindings. That is why I was sent here, to this council of unlikely allies. Why maintain such a council at all? Torian asked. Elves, dwarves, Menway have grown apart over the centuries. Because some threats transcend old grievances, Arista replied simply. The Watchful Council has existed since the end of the Second Age, preserving knowledge too dangerous for the world at large, but too valuable to destroy. Few know of it even among the wise. Haleth approached with his prepared treatment of paste that glowed faintly blue in the chamber's light. Remove the bandage, he instructed. Torian complied, revealing the full extent of the shadow touch. The wound itself was small, but the corruption had spread in dark veins across his forearm, the flesh beneath turning translucent in places. Hold him, Haleth told the others. Before Torian could question this, Thrain and Gundahar gripped his arms firmly. Haleth pressed the glowing paste directly into the wound. Pain exploded through Torian's body knot, the cold numbness of the shadow touch, but searing heat that seemed to reach his very bones. He cried out despite himself, his vision blurring. Through the haze of agony, he heard Haleth chanting in a language older than any Torian knew, not Elvish. Not the tongues of men or dwarves, but something that seemed to resonate with the stone around them. The pain peaked, then suddenly receded. Torian's vision cleared to reveal the others watching him with expressions ranging from concern to clinical interest. He looked down at his arm. The shadow touch remained, but the dark veins had receded, and the translucent quality of his flesh had solidified. "It is contained, for now," Haleth said, binding the wound with fresh cloth, "but not cured. Only completing the ritual can do that for you, and for all touched by this darkness. Then we must act quickly," Balin decided. "Erister, take him to the Silent Watchers. Search the records for alternatives to the four-relic binding. Thrain, set watchers on all approaches Eve. Voidwalkers have followed him this far. They may test our defenses. And us?" Gundahar asked, indicating himself and Haleth. "Prepare your people," Balin told them grimly. "If the worst comes, we may need to evacuate the valley. This corruption spreads faster than any account describes." As the council dispersed to their tasks, Torian found himself alone with Erister. The Rivendell elf regarded him thoughtfully. "You've traveled far, kinsman, carrying a burden few would willingly bear." He gestured to the book, which Balin had carefully rewrapped and returned to Torian's pack. "Such artifacts change those who carry them. How much has it whispered to you? How much have you listened?" Torian met his gaze steadily. "Enough to know the danger, not enough to be seduced by it." Erister nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Come then. The Silent Watchers awaits, and perhaps answers to questions we have not yet thought to ask." As they left the council chamber, Torian cast one last look at the deep Vergathus hidden sanctuary of Durin's folk that had survived ages of darkness. He wondered how many other such places existed in the world, guarding ancient secrets and preparing for threats long forgotten by the kingdoms above. And he wondered if Arathon still lived, somewhere in the corrupted lands to the west, carrying his own burdens toward an uncertain fate. The Silent Watchers was unlike any elven structure Torian had ever seen. While most elven architecture embraced the natural world, this place had been built for vigilance and secrecy, carved directly into the mountainside above the dwarven deep forge. Its stone facades bore little ornamentation save for watchful eyes etched at regular intervals sentinels that seemed to follow their movements as Erister led him upward through hidden passages. "This outpost predates the last alliance," Erister explained as they climbed a narrow staircase spiraling within the mountain. "Built when Sauron first rose to power, before his identity was known to all. The Watchful Council established it to monitor threats from the east, but its purpose evolved over time. To guard knowledge, Torian surmised, too dangerous to be widely known." Erister nodded. "Knowledge, artifacts, records of battles fought in shadow while the Great Wars claimed the attention of history." He paused at a landing, pressing his palm against a section of wall inscribed with flowing script. The stone responded to his touch, sliding aside to reveal a passage. Few remember these places now. Even among the elves, the Silent Watchers has passed into legend. The passage opened into a vast circular chamber. its domed ceiling painted with constellations that slowly rotated through any mechanical means Torian could discern, but through ancient magic woven into the very stone. The walls were lined with shelves containing scrolls, books, and artifacts of clearly varied origins. At the chamber's center stood a raised platform supporting a pedestal of white marble. The Hall of Records, Arista announced. Every significant event, ritual, and binding performed by the Watchful Council has been preserved here. Including, he moved to a section of shelving and retrieved a leather-bound volume, the complete account of Morathiel's binding. Torian approached as Arista placed the book on the central pedestal. Unlike the dark tome Torian carried, this volume radiated no malevolence. Its pages, when Arista carefully opened it, were filled with precise script in multiple languages, accompanied by detailed illustrations. Here, Arista said, turning to a specific page, the ritual of binding, performed in the year 1975 of the Third Age, as Morval fell and the Witch King fled south. Torian studied the account with growing concern. It confirms what we learned from the Hermit and our own book, for relics, for anchor points for the binding. Without all four, the binding would be incomplete, Arista finished grimly. But there may be alternatives. He turned more pages, revealing diagrams of energy flows and ritual configurations. The original binding was designed for permanence. Perhaps a temporary solution exists, something to contain Morathiel, until the fourth anchor can be recreated. Recreated? Torian looked up sharply. Is that possible? Difficult, but not impossible. The mirror was the window to Morathiel's prisoner, way to monitor his containment without risking direct contact. Its destruction complicates matters, but doesn't necessarily prevent a new binding. Arista's expression grew troubled. However, there is another requirement that may prove more challenging. He pointed to a passage describing the blood sacrifice needed to complete the ritual. The original binding used blood from a direct descendant of Elendila, Prince of Arthedain, one of the last kingdoms of Arna. It had to be given willingly, with full knowledge of the cost. Arathan is of that lineage, Torian said. The silver box recognized his blood. Then he is essential to any rebinding, Arista concluded. Without him, another of his exact blood Linivan, a temporary solution may fail. Torian's thoughts returned to their separation in the Weather Hills. Two Arathan facing corrupted beasts alone while shadow touch spread through his body. We need to know if he still lives. Arista nodded in agreement. The Farsi as he led Torian to an alcove off the main chamber, where several crystal spheres of varying sizes rested on stands of twisted silver. These were crafted in the Second Age, when the gift of foresight was stronger among our kind. With the proper focus, they can show distant places and persons connected to the viewer. I have nothing of Arathan's, Torian admitted, but we traveled together, fought together. Would that connection suffice? Perhaps, Arista said, selecting a medium-sized sphere. But the shadow touch you both share may provide a stronger link. The corruption connects all it touches to its source. He placed the crystal on a small table between them, then gestured for Torian to sit opposite him. Place your hands on the sphere. Focus your thoughts on Arathan, his face, his voice, the last moment you saw him. I will guide the seeing. Torian did as instructed, the crystal cool beneath his palms. He closed his eyes, recalling Arathan's grim determination as they parted in the weather hills. The ranger facing certain death to ensure Torian's escape. He remembered the shadow touch spreading across Arathan's chest, the pain the man had endured without complaint. Arista began to speak in ancient Quenya, words of seeing and finding that seemed to resonate within the crystal itself. Torian felt a strange pulling sensation, as if part of his consciousness stretched across vast distances. The shadow touch on his arm pulsed in response, a cold fire that spread up his veins toward his heart. "Open your eyes," Arista whispered, "but do not break contact with the crystal." Torian obeyed. The sphere between them had filled with swirling mist that gradually resolved into immersive. At first, then sharpening with painful clarity, Arathan lived. But his condition sent a chill through Torian's heart. The ranger was bound to a stone altar in what appeared to be ruins perhaps, the very chamber where they had first discovered the relics. His skin had turned almost translucent, dark veins visible beneath like a map of corruption. Around him moved shadow forms, void walkers, more solid than those they had glimpsed in the mirror, their featureless faces now bearing suggestions of mouths and eyes. And standing over Arathan was a figure that could only be Morathile himself. Once human, now something else, entirely little and gaunt, with skin like cracked porcelain through which darkness seemed to flow. He wore ancient armor of black metal, and upon his head sat a crown of iron thorns. His eyes were pools of void, reflecting no light. In his hand, Morathil held the silver box, open now to reveal its contents. A small fragment of what appeared to be bone, blackened with age. A portion of himself, Arista breathed, hidden away during the original binding as insurance against his complete destruction. They watched in horror as Morathil placed the bone fragment against Arathan's chest, directly over his heart. The ranger's body convulsed, his mouth opening in a silent scream as the fragment seemed to sink into his flesh, disappearing beneath the skin. Hayes using Arathan as a vessel, Arista realized. The blood connection makes it possible. A temporary body until he can fully manifest. The vision shifted, showing more of the ruined chamber. Voidwalkers moved in complex patterns around the altar, their movements forming a ritual dance. The black dagger lay on a smaller pedestal nearby, its runes pulsing in time with Arathan's labored breathing. "They're attempting their own ritual," Torian said, "using the relics they have to strengthen Morathil's return. But it's incomplete," Arista noted. "They lack the book you carry, and the mirror is destroyed. What they attempt is dangerous for them as much as for the world." The vision blurred suddenly, as if something had detected their watching. Morathil's void-like eyes seemed to turn directly toward them, his cracked lips forming words they couldn't hear but could somehow understand. "I see you, Watchers. I remember your kind. The binding weakens. I come." The crystal sphere shattered with a sound like breaking ice, forcing Torian and Arista to shield their faces from flying shards. When they looked up, a single fragment remained on the table between them, black smoke rising from its surface before it crumbled to dust. "He sensed us," Arista said, his voice tight with concern. "And now he knows where we area, at least, that we watch him." "How much time do we have?" Torian asked, rising to his feet, "before Arathan is fully claimed?" Arista shook his head grimly. "Days at most. The process has already begun." He returned to the main chamber, moving with renewed urgency to the pedestal where the ritual book lay open. "We must find an alternative binding, something that can work with the relics we have." They spent hours searching through the ancient text, comparing its accounts with what they had learned from Torian's dark tome. The original binding had been a complex affair, requiring precise alignment of celestial bodies, multiple participants from each of the free peoples, and the 4 relics placed at cardinal points around the subject. "Here," Arista said finally, pointing to a passage near the end of the volume. "A contingency added after the ritual was complete. In case of partial awakening." Torian read the passage carefully. "A temporary binding, using the original anchor points, but with reduced power. It would not hold forever, but it might buy us time," Arista finished. "Time to recreate the 4th anchor, to gather the necessary participants, to prepare properly. The contingency ritual required at least 1 representative of each free people, dwarf and man, plus the blood connection that Arathon provided. It could be performed with as few as 3 of the original relics, though its strength would be diminished. We have the book," Torian counted. "Morathil has the dagger and the box. The mirror is destroyed. But we have something he doesn't," Arista pointed out. "Knowledge of the complete ritual." And he turned to another section of the text, the original binding site. "The chamber beneath the ruins of Arnor, where you first found the relics. Return there," Torian asked incredulously. "That's where Morathil is strongest. It's also where the original binding was anchored to the physical world," Arista explained. "The contingency ritual must be performed there, at the convergence point of the anchor lines." A commotion from the passage leading to the deep forge interrupted their discussion. Balin appeared, his expression grave, accompanied by Thrain and several other dwarves in full battle gear. "Trouble," the elder dwarf announced without preamble. "Our outer sentries report movement on the eastern slopes. Shadow creatures, like those you described, and with them, men with darkness in their eyes. Corrupted thralls," Torian said grimly. "How many? Dozens, at least. And something else, your presence, that our wards cannot fully detect. It moves like smoke between the trees, leaving death in its wake." "A void walker," Arista concluded, "perhaps sent ahead to test our defenses." "Our defenses will hold," Thrain stated with dwarven confidence. "The deep forge has never fallen to enemy hands, and it will not fall now. But we cannot remain besieged," Torian pointed out. "The contingency ritual must be performed at the original binding city Thruins, where Arathon is held." Balin's bushy eyebrows rose. "You've seen him. He lives." "For now," Arista confirmed, "but Morathel uses him as a vessel, exploiting the blood connection. We have little time. The dwarves exchanged troubled glances. Finally, Balin spoke. The eastern passes are watched. But there are other ways through these mountains, ways known only to Durin's folk. If you must return west, we can guide you. Not alone, Arista said firmly. The contingency ritual requires representatives of all free peoples. A dwarf must accompany us, Thrain scoffed. You ask us to abandon our home when it faces siege. I ask for one volunteer, Arista corrected, to represent your people in a ritual that may save all our homes, not just the deep forge. Silence fell over the group. Then, to everyone's surprise, Balin stepped forward. I will go, he announced. I am old enough to remember the last time darkness threatened to consume the world, and young enough still to swing an axe in its defense. Thrain looked as if he might object, but instead clasped Balin's shoulder in a gesture of respect. The wisdom of our council goes with you, old friend, as does the strength of our ancestors. We need a representative of men as well, Arista reminded them. The woodsmen have already fled the valley, Thrain interrupted. When the shadow creatures were first sighted, they protect their own villages now. Turian considered their options. Arathan himself is of the race of men. Would his presence, even corrupted, satisfy the ritual's requirement? Arista looked uncertain. Perhaps the text is not specific on this point, but it's a risk we may have to take. Then it's decided, Balin said with dwarven finality. The three of us will attempt this contingency ritual. But first he turned to Turian. We must properly arm ourselves. No ordinary weapons will serve against Voidwalkers and their master. He led them back down to the deep forge, through passages that bypassed the main cavern where preparations for defense were clearly underway. Dwarves moved with purpose, carrying weapons and supplies, reinforcing gates, and setting mechanical traps at key points. Their destination was a smaller chamber deep within the mountain, its entrance guarded by dwarves in ceremonial armor who stepped aside at Balin's approach. Inside, weapons of clearly ancient make rested on stone pedestals, each illuminated by shafts of light from crystals embedded in the ceiling. The Vault of Durin, Balin announced with reverence. Here we keep the greatest works of our ancestors' weapons, forged to fight the darkness in ages past. He approached a pedestal bearing a battle axe of unusual design. Its double-headed blade was forged from a silvery metal that seemed to capture and amplify the chamber's light, while runes of power ran along its haft of dark wood. Azaghal Balin named it, lifting the weapon with practiced ease despite his age. Forged during the War of Wrath to battle the servants of Morgoth, it has tasted the blood of Balrogs. It will serve against Voidwalkers. For Arista, Balin selected a slender sword with a crystal pommel, crafted by both elven and dwarven hands during the last alliance. Its edge never dulls, and it burns those touched by shadow. Finally, he turned to Turian. For you, something special. He led them to a pedestal somewhat apart from the others, where a bow reset its limbs of pale wood inlaid with mithril, its strings shimmering like spun moonlight. This bow was a gift from your people to mine. Long ago, when our friendship was still strong, Balin explained. Its arrows fly true even in darkness, and can pierce what normal shafts cannot. Beside the bow lay a quiver of arrows unlike any Taurian had seen. Their shafts were white wood, their fletching silver, and their heads a crystal that caught the light in hypnotic patterns. Starglass Arista identified the arrowheads with surprise. I thought the art of working it was lost. 2 elves, perhaps, Balin said with a hint of pride. Dwarves remember. Taurian accepted the bow with appropriate reverence, testing its draw. It responded to his touch as if made for his hand, the string pulling with perfect tension. I am honored to bear such a weapon. Honor it by using it well. Balin replied simply. Now, we must prepare for our journey. The passage I have in mind will take us beneath the mountains, avoiding the eastern slopes where shadow creatures gather. But it is not without its own dangers. As they left the vault, Taurian felt the weight of their mission settling upon him. They would return to where this Baganthy-ruined outpost where he and Arathon had first discovered the relics. But this time, they would face not just shadow creatures, but Morathil himself, partially awakened and using Arathon's body as a vessel. And they would do so with incomplete knowledge, improvised ritual components, and only 3 participants where the original binding had used dozens. The odds were not in their favor. But as Taurian followed Balin through the deep forge toward whatever secret passage the dwarves had maintained, he found himself thinking not of the ritual or the danger, but of Arathonth Ranger, who had begun as a distrusted stranger and become an ally worth risking everything to save. "We're coming," he promised silently, his hand tightening on the ancient bow. "Hold on just a little longer." Behind them, the dwarves of the deep forge prepared for siege. Above, the silent watchers stood empty once more, its knowledge temporarily abandoned. And ahead lay a journey through darkness, toward a confrontation with an evil that should have remained bound for all time. The truth had been unveiled. Now they had to act on it, before it was too late for Arathan and for all the free peoples of Tirenna. The passage Balin led them to was hidden behind a seemingly ordinary section of wall in one of the deep forge's lower levels. A few words in Kuzdel, a precise sequence of pressure points, and the stones slid aside to reveal a narrow tunnel barely tall enough for Taurian and Arista to walk upright. "The old way," Balin explained, lighting a crystal lamp that cast blue-white illumination through the passage, carved before the founding of Arnor, when dwarves first explored these mountains. It runs deep, beneath the roots of the range, emerging in the foothills west of the Weather Hills. "How long will the journey take?" Taurian asked, adjusting the ancient bow across his back. 3 days, if we're fortunate," Balin replied. "Longer if the lower passages have deteriorated. Few have walked this path in centuries." They entered single file, Balin leading with his lamp, Taurian following, and Arista bringing up the rear. The wall sealed itself behind them with a soft grinding of stone, leaving only the path ahead. Unlike the carefully crafted halls of the deep forge, this tunnel showed signs of great Adjura hewn in places, natural cavern in others, with only occasional sections bearing the precise stonework characteristic of dwarven engineering. The air was cool but not stale, suggesting some form of ventilation system still functioned after all these years. They walked in silence for hours, descending steadily deeper beneath the mountains. Occasionally Balin would pause to consult markings on the wall's runes, so weathered that only a dwarf's eyes could discern their meaning. At one junction he hesitated longer than usual. "Something troubles you?" Arista asked. "These markings," Balin said, tracing ancient carvings with his fingers. "They warn of that which sleeps below. A common enough caution in deep places," but he frowned. "The rune form is unusual, older than it should be. Could others have used this passage?" Torian suggested. "In the ages since it was carved?" "Perhaps," Balin conceded, though he didn't sound convinced. "We continue, but with greater caution." The tunnel widened as they progressed, opening into a vast cavern whose ceiling was lost in darkness above. Their path skirted its edge, a narrow ledge overlooking an abyss of unknown depth. Balin's lamp revealed glimpses of massive columns rising from the darkness net, natural formations, but constructed supports larger than any Torian had seen, even in the greatest halls of the elves. "What is this place?" he asked, voice hushed by the oppressive sense of age that permeated the cavern. "The dwarves of old called it Tumenzaharth Hollowhold," Balin replied. "A dwelling place from the first age, abandoned when the mountains shifted and deeper veins of mithril were discovered elsewhere." His expression grew somber. "Or so our records claim. Some tales suggest it was abandoned for darker reasons." They continued along the ledge, the silence broken only by their footsteps and the occasional distant drip of water. Torian felt watched, though his keen eyes detected no movement in the vast darkness. The book in his pack seemed heavier here, its whispers more insistent, as if responding to something in this ancient place. When they finally left the great cavern behind, all three felt relief, though none spoke of it. The passage narrowed again, leading them through a maze of smaller tunnels that gradually ascended. They made camp in a small chamber where several passages intersected, marked by dwarven runes indicating it as a designated rest point. As they ate a spare meal of journey bread and dried meat from their packs, Arista unfolded the ritual text he had brought from the Silent Watchers. "We should review the contingency binding," he said. "Each of us must know our role perfectly when the time comes." The ritual, as described in the ancient text, required precise positioning and timing. The 3 relics they hoped to secure, book, dagger, and silver boxwood, form a triangle around Arathon, with each participant stationed at one point. The words of binding were complex, drawing on languages of all 3 races represented. "The critical moment comes when the blood offering is made," Arista explained, pointing to a diagram in the text. "Arathon's blood must be given willingly, even if he is partially corrupted. Without that willing sacrifice, the binding will fail. And if Morathil has already claimed too much of him?" Torian asked the question that had been troubling him since their vision in the Farseer. Arista's expression was grim. "Then we must be prepared to end his suffering, and find another solution to the binding. There may not be time for another solution, Balin pointed out. If Morathil fully manifests in our world, containing him again would require power beyond what we three can muster. They fell silent, each contemplating the weight of what lay ahead. Finally, Torian spoke. We should rest. Tomorrow's journey will be no easier. They established watchers, with Torian taking the first. As the others settled into uneasy sleep, he sat near the chamber's entrance, the ancient bow across his knees, listening to the deep silence of the mountain's heart. The whispers from the book grew louder in that silence, more coherent. Torian resisted their call, focusing instead on memories of the woodland Riamit's green canopies. The sound of elven songs among the trees, the play of sunlight through leaves. But other images intruded. Arathan's face contorted in pain as shadow touch spread through his veins. The Void Walker's hollow eyes turning toward them in the Farseer's vision. Morethil's cracked lips forming words of threat and promise. When Arista relieved him for the second watch, Torian found no rest in sleep, only fragmented dreams of shadow and pursuit. They resumed their journey at what they judged to be dawn, though no sunlight penetrated these depths. The passage continued its gradual ascent, occasionally branching into multiple tunnels that required Balin's expertise to navigate. The signs of ancient dwarven presence grew sparser, the tunnel more natural in its formation. We approached the western end of the range. Balin informed them as they paused to refill water skins at a small underground stream. The old way becomes less defined here, following natural caverns more than constructed passages. And beyond, Torian asked. Beyond lies the wilderness between the weather hills and the ruins where your journey began. Balin replied, territory likely corrupted now by Morathar's influence. They continued in grim silence, each preparing mentally for what awaited them above. The tunnel system became increasingly complex, with natural caverns intersecting constructed passages in ways that would have been disorienting without Balin's guidance. In one such cavern, they discovered signs of recent passage in it, dwarven or elven, but something else. Scratches marred the stone walls at irregular heights, and a black, tar-like substance pooled in depressions on the floor. We're not alone down here, Torian said quietly, examining the scratches. These were made by claws or talons, but in no pattern one recognized. Corrupted creatures, perhaps Arista suggested. The shadow touch affects beasts as well as men. No beast I know leaves such marks, Balin countered, dipping the head of his axe into one of the black pools. The substance hissed on contact with the enchanted metal, evaporating into foul-smelling smoke. This is older, something that dwells in deep places. They proceeded with weapons, ready Torian with an arrow nocked to the ancient bow, Arista with his crystal-pummeled sword drawn, and Balin with Azagel gripped firmly in both hands. The cavern narrowed into a natural tunnel that wound upward, its walls glistening with moisture that reflected their lamplight in disorienting patterns. The attack came without warning. From a side passage too small to notice, a creature lunged at Belina Pale. emaciated thing with too many limbs, its body segmented like an insect but with disturbingly humanoid features. Its mouth, a circular maw ringed with needle-like teeth, opened in a hissing shriek. Balin reacted with dwarven swiftness, a zaggle sweeping in a deadly arc that caught the creature mid-lunge. The enchanted blade sliced through its pale flesh with surprising ease, black ichor spraying across the tunnel walls. The creature's shriek cut off abruptly, its severed portions continuing to twitch and writhe on the stone floor. "Move," Balin ordered, already pushing past the creature's remains. "Where there's one, there will be more." They ran, abandoning stealth for speed as more shrieks echoed through the tunnels behind them. The passage steepened, becoming a natural chimney that required them to climb rather than walk. Balin went first, despite his shorter stature, finding handholds with the surety of one born to stone. Torian followed, with Arista bringing up the rear, occasionally glancing down to ensure they weren't pursued. They emerged into another cavern, this one smaller but with multiple exits. Balin hesitated, studying the barely visible markings near each opening. "Quickly," Arista urged, the shrieks growing louder below. "The wrong choice leads to dead ends or worse," Balin replied tersely. "Give me a moment." Torian turned back toward the chimney they had ascended, bow raised. Movement flickered in the darkness below, pale limbs scrabbling against stone, multiple bodies contorting through spaces too small for their bulk. "Whatever choice you make it now," he warned, loosing an arrow into the mass of writhing forms. The starglass arrowhead flared brilliantly on impact, and a chorus of pained shrieks confirmed its effectiveness. "This way," Balin decided, pointing to a passage slightly wider than the others. "It's not the main route, but it should connect eventually." They hurried into the chosen tunnel, which ascended more steeply than previous passages. Behind them, the first of the pale creatures emerged from the chimney, its body twisting unnaturally as it oriented toward their scent. Torian loosed another arrow, buying them precious seconds as they climbed. The new passage was rougher, with loose stones underfoot that threatened their footing. They moved as quickly as caution allowed, aware of the pursuing creatures but unable to see them in the darkness behind. Only the occasional shriek confirmed they were still followed. The tunnel ended abruptly at a sheer rock face. Balin cursed in Kuzdel, running his hands over the stone. "A collapse," he muttered. "Recent, by the look of it. Can we clear it?" Arista asked, glancing back down the tunnel where sounds of pursuit grew louder. "Not quickly enough," Balin admitted. He pointed to a narrow crevice to their right that may connect to another passage. "It's our only option now." The crevice was barely wide enough for Torian and Arista to squeeze through sideways. Balin, with his stockier build, had to remove his pack and push it ahead of him. They emerged into yet another tunnel, this one clearly artificial with smooth walls and a level floor. "We're back on the old way," Balin confirmed, retrieving his pack. "But I don't recognize this section. The collapse must have forced us onto a branch I'm not familiar with." "Does it lead upward?" Torian asked, the practical concern foremost in his mind. Balin studied the subtle incline of the floor. "Yes, but whether to the surface or just another level of tunnels, I cannot say. With no better option, they continued along the new passage. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, suggesting the pale creatures couldn't navigate the narrow crevice they had used. Small mercies, Torian thought, though he kept his bow ready. The tunnel maintained its artificial perfection for some distance before opening into a chamber unlike any they had yet encountered. Perfect hemispheres carved into the walls at regular intervals, each containing a stone sphere of different colored mineral. The floor was inlaid with a mosaic depicting constellations, while the ceiling bore a relief map of Mountain Rangasum, recognizable, others unknown to any of them. "This is not dwarven work," Balin said, his voice hushed with wonder and wariness. "Nor elven, nor of men." "What then?" Arista asked, examining the nearest stone spheria, deep blue mineral shot through with veins of silver. "Something older," Balin replied, "from before the shaping of Tiranor as we know it." They crossed the chamber cautiously, weapons ready though no threat presented itself. On the far side, a single passage continued upward, its entrance flanked by pillars carved with symbols none of them recognized. "We have no choice but to continue," Torian said, though unease prickled along his spine. The book in his pack had fallen completely silent, as if whatever intelligence resided within it was itself awed or cowed by this place. The passage beyond the pillars was differential, artificial, but with subtle curves rather than straight lines, and a ceiling that arched higher than seemed necessary. The walls bore no markings or decorations, yet gave the impression of watching, of awareness. They walked for what seemed hours, the passage maintaining its gentle upward slope without branching or varying. No side tunnels, no chambers, no features of any kindred, the endless, curving path leading ever upward. "Something's wrong," Arista said finally, breaking the silence that had fallen over them. "We should have reached some landmark by now." Balin nodded grimly. "I've been counting paces. We've walked farther than the mountain is wide, yet still we climb." Torian stopped, examining the walls more closely. Could it be some form of enchantment? A defensive measure to confuse intruders? Possible, Arista agreed. But what is being defended, and by whom? As if in answer, the passage ahead of them changed. Where before it had continued in its endless curve, now it straightened, leading to a doorway of pale stone that emitted a soft, golden light. They approached cautiously, weapons ready. The doorway was tall and narrow, its frame inscribed with the same unknown symbols they had seen on the pillars in the chamber below. Beyond it lay not another tunnel or chamber, but what appeared to be open sky, twilight vista of stars, above a landscape of rolling hills, a way out. Balin wondered aloud, though his tone suggested skepticism. "Or another deception," Arista cautioned. "This mountain range holds more secrets than any of our people suspected." Torian studied the doorway, noting how the light that spilled from it cast no shadows, despite its brightness. "We have little choice," he said finally. "Back lies only the pale creatures and collapsed tunnels. Forward, at least, offers the possibility of progress." With weapons still ready, They stepped through the doorway, one by one, first Torian, then Arista, and finally Balin. The sensation was disorienting, a momentary feeling of weightlessness, followed by solid ground beneath their feet. But what lay beyond was not what they had glimpsed from the tunnel. They stood in a circular chamber of white stone, its walls lined with alcoves containing artifacts of clearly varied arrogance, weapons, scrolls, jewelry, and objects whose purpose none could guess. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal supporting a sphere of crystal similar to the farseers in the Silent Watchers, but larger and more intricately constructed. And before the pedestal stood a figure that turned to regard them with eyes that held the wisdom and weariness of countless ages. "Welcome, travelers," the figure said in a voice that seemed to bypass their ears and speak directly to their minds. Few find their way to the crossroads unbidden. Fewer still while bearing such burdens. The figure appeared male, tall and slender, clad in robes of shifting color that seemed to contain patterns just beyond comprehension. His features were neither elven nor human, yet somehow reminiscent of Bothichlis, serene, but with an underlying alertness that suggested great power carefully controlled. "Who are you?" Arista asked, his sword still raised, though his stance had shifted from aggression to caution. "And what is this place?" "I am a watcher," the figure replied simply. "One of those appointed to observe the threads of fate as they weave through the tapestry of Arda. And this," he gestured to the chamber around them, "is a nexus point, a place where paths converge across distances, both physical and metaphysical." "We seek no quarrel," Torian said carefully. "Only passage westward, toward the ruins of an outpost of Arna." The Watcher's gaze settled on him, seeming to look through rather than at him. "You seek more than passage, Torian of the woodland realm. You seek to rebind what was bound before one called Morathil, who walks between worlds." Torian tensed. "How do you know this?" "I observe. It is my function." The Watcher turned his attention to the crystal sphere on the pedestal. Within it, images formed the ruined outpost where their journey began, now surrounded by corrupted creatures and void walkers. Arathon bound to the stone altar, his body increasingly transparent as Morathil's essence claimed him, and spreading outward from this center, a wave of corruption that withered forests, poisoned waters, and twisted living creatures into mockeries of their natural forms. "The binding weakens faster than you know," the Watcher continued. "What you witnessed through the Farseer was but the beginning. Morathel's essence merges with your friend's body, using the blood connection to anchor itself fully in the physical world. Then we must hurry," Balin urged. "Can you help us reach the ruins more quickly?" The Watcher regarded him thoughtfully. "I can open a path that will lead you where you wish to go. But first, you must understand what you face." He gestured again to the crystal sphere, where the image shifted to show Morathil as he had been before his corruptiona Nemenorian, prince of noble bearing. His eyes clear and purpose righteous. "He was not always as you know him," the Watcher explained. "Morathil was once a defender against darkness, a prince who led his people in battle against the forces of Morval. His fall came not through weakness, but through sacrifice, offered himself to infiltrate the Witch King's inner circle, to learn secrets that might turn the tide of war. The sphere showed Morathel's gradual corruption, his noble features hardening, his eyes growing cold as the Witch King's influence seeped into his very being. He learned secrets, yes, but at the cost of his humanity. The Witch King recognized his bloodline's power and twisted it, transforming Morathel into something neither living nor dead, a conduit between worlds. The binding ritual, Arista said. It was performed by his own kin, wasn't it? Those of his bloodline who remained uncorrupted. The Watcher nodded. His brother led the ritual, using their shared blood to create a prison that would hold Morathel without destroying him completely. For they hoped, in their wisdom or their folly, that he might one day be redeemed. Can he be? Torian asked. Redeemed, rather than simply bound again. The Watcher's expression grew somber. That path was possible once. Now, after centuries of imprisonment between worlds, little remains of the man he was. Rage and hunger have consumed him. The void has become his nature. Then our course is clear, Barlan stated firmly. We must complete the contingency binding before he fully manifests. Your determination is admirable, the Watcher said. But know this, the contingency ritual was designed for a partial awakening, not one so advanced. Morathel has already claimed much of your friend's essence. Separating them may not be possible without destroying both. The implications hung heavy in the air. Torian thought of Arathan's sacrifice to ensure his escape, of the Ranger's quiet courage in the face of spreading shadow touch. There must be a way, he insisted. Some modification to the ritual that would spare Arathan. The Watchers studied him with those ancient, knowing eyes. Perhaps, he conceded, but it would require a substitution Thor vessel of the same bloodline willing to take Arathan's place in the binding. There is no one else, Arista pointed out. The line of Arthedain has dwindled over the centuries. The Starblood who remain are scattered, their exact lineages often unknown even to themselves. Then you must be prepared to make difficult choices when the moment comes, the Watcher said. He moved to one of the alcoves lining the chamber walls and retrieved a small objector pendant of silver set with a clear crystal. This may help. It contains light from a time before darkness entered the world. Against creatures of shadow and void, it offers some protection. He handed the pendant to Torian, who felt a subtle warmth emanate from it as it touched his palm. Thank you, he said, slipping the chain over his head. But we still need a way for water path to the ruins that avoids the corrupted lands between. That I can provide, the Watcher replied. He approached a section of the chamber wall that appeared no different from the rest, passing his hand over its smooth surface. The stone rippled like water, then parted to reveal a passage bathed in the same golden light as the doorway they had entered through. This path will lead you to the edge of the corrupted lands surrounding the ruins, the Watcher explained. From there, you must proceed on your own. My influence cannot extend into areas where Morathel's power has taken root. How can we trust that this path leads where you claim? Balin asked, dwarven suspicion evident in his tone. The Watcher smiled faintly. You cannot, but consider your alternatives. child of Allah. Balin grunted acknowledgement of the point. Very well. But no, deceive, you deceive us. The axes of Durin's folk will find you, even in this hidden place. I expect no less, the Watcher replied, seemingly untroubled by the threat. Now go. Time flows differently here, but in the world beyond, Morethal's manifestation continues apace. They gathered their packs and weapons, preparing to enter the new passage. Before they stepped through, Torian turned back to the Watcher. You never answered, Duho. Are you really? Not just a Watcher, but a name. The figure's expression softened slightly. Names have power, Torian of the Woodland Realm. Mine was given up long ago when I accepted this duty. But in the tongue of your people, I was once called Iwendel. Arista inhaled sharply. That name is known in the histories of Rivendell. You were what I was, matters less than what you must now do, the Watcher interrupted gently but firmly. Go, complete your task. And remember when the moment comes to choose, look not with your eyes, but with your heart. With those cryptic words hanging in the air, they stepped through the rippling stone into the golden passage beyond. The wall sealed behind them, leaving only the path ahead, a tunnel of light that seemed to bend and twist in ways that defied physical space. They walked in silence, each processing what they had learned from the enigmatic Watcher, the implications of Morethal's origin, the possibility that Arathon might not be saved. The mysterious nature of the being who had aided them all weighed heavily on their minds. The passage of time became difficult to judge in the golden light that surrounded them. They walked for what might have been hours or merely minutes before the tunnel began to change, the light dimming gradually until they could see a terminus ahead, an opening that revealed night sky beyond. They emerged on a hillside overlooking a valley shrouded in mist. In the distance, barely visible through the gloom, stood the ruins of the outpost where Torian and Arathon had first discovered the relics. Even from this distance, the corruption was evident. Land immediately surrounding the ruins was blackened and withered, and strange lights flickered among the crumbling walls. We've arrived, Torian said quietly. But how do we approach? The valley floor teems with corrupted creatures and void walkers. Balin studied the terrain with a strategist's eye. There he pointed to a ridge that extended from their position toward the ruins. It offers cover most of the way. We can approach under darkness, using the mist for additional concealment. And once we reach the ruins, Arista asked, the contingency ritual must be performed in the binding chamber itself, where Arathon is held. We fight our way in, if necessary, Balin stated grimly, hefting a zaggle. But first, we prepare properly. From his pack, the dwarf produced small bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Explosive charges, he explained, laying them out carefully. A specialty of my people. They'll create a diversion when we need it most. Arista removed several vials from his own pack potions of elven make that would enhance strength and speed for a short time, though at the cost of exhaustion afterward. And Torian checked his quiver of starglass arrows, ensuring each was perfect and ready for the coming conflict. As night deepened around them, they made final preparations for the desperate mission ahead. The pendant the Watcher had given Torian glowed faintly against his chest, a small comfort in the growing darkness. The book in his pack had resumed its whispers, more urgent now, as if sensing its proximity to the other relics. "Remember," Arista said as they prepared to descend toward the ridge, "the contingency ritual requires all three of us. If any falls, the binding cannot be completed." "Then none shall fall," Balin replied with dwarven certainty. "We go together, we return together." Torian nodded agreement, though his thoughts were on Arathanan, on the Watcher's warning that separating him from Morathil might not be possible without destroying both. He touched the pendant at his throat, wondering what choice he would make when that moment came. "For Arathon," he said quietly, "and for all the free peoples of Tirana." "For Arathon," Arista and Balin echoed, and together they began their descent toward the corrupted ruins where their final battle awaited. The descent into the valley was treacherous. The ridge Balin had identified offered cover, but the ground beneath their feet had been transformed by corruption and solid earth, now spongy and unstable, occasionally releasing puffs of noxious vapor when disturbed. Vegetation that should have provided additional concealment had twisted into grotesque forms, leaves like grasping hands, and roots that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Darkness has stirred, but its full shadow has yet to fall. Continue the journey in Part 2.